Hello and welcome. My name is Jason Turner, and it is my pleasure to talk you through the wines of South Africa on this online wine course. We're going to talk today about the maps, and you'll have the opportunity to see a number of different maps. We'll go through key facts that are useful for you now and also for your future time working with South African wines and also for your future knowledge. The most important wine regions, climate, grape growing and soil types, the historical overview of the country and of the regions, the grape varieties, the wine styles and the production. So looking at the South African wine map, you're going to see a number of 1, 2, 3 different wine maps, and I invite you to specifically look into the different wine growing regions, and more specifically, their geographical location. For example, what is their proximity to the ocean? What is the altitude? Is it a mountainous area? Is it more of an inland continental climate style? This is something which you can all see, and that does influence A, the wine styles, and B, the choice of grape varieties for the specific regions. And see specifically that the Western Cape, a lot of these wine regions here in South Africa do hug onto the ocean, giving it this very specific maritime climate. So, South Africa, the capital, as you can see, is in Pretoria, and then you have the judicial capital in Bloemfontein and Cape Town, which is then more specific to where we are talking about in wine country. The largest city is Johannesburg, which is then located more on the eastern part of South Africa. What you also see is there are different languages as well, up to 11 different languages, whereby the specific is the Afrikaans, which also from a historical point of view is what a lot of the former Dutch immigrants or travelers, if you like, settlers, let's say settlers, speak nowadays. And here you can see from the period of 1992 to 2021 how the vineyard area in hectares did increase. And just to say as a side note that the birth of South African wine as a wine growing country, the industry as we know it today, with a lot of independent producers, a lot of family-owned producers, started around 1994. So South Africa ranks 8th as the overall wine production of wine in the world and produces about 4.1% of the world's wine. Wine grapes as a percentage of total vineyard area. Here we're talking initially about the different grape varieties as well. From a white wine, we have the Chenin Blanc. Then we have Colombard, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. And I think it is when you think about South Africa, what really the white grape variety that does come to mind is Chenin Blanc, and then most certainly Sauvignon Blanc as well, along with Chardonnay. As far as the red wine varieties are concerned, you've got Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, as we also know as being the Syrah in Europe, Pinotage, which is a crossing grape variety specific to South Africa, a crossing that was done about 100 years ago as well, at this point, a crossing of Pinot Noir and the French variety Cinsault, and then obviously Merlot as well in 4th position. So the wines of South Africa, most important wine regions. Let's hone in now on where the specific wine regions are that are of obviously commercial significance, both in the European export markets, international export markets, and also in South Africa. So we start with Elgin, then we got Franschhoek and Paarl, Stellenbosch, which I think a lot of you may have already heard of, Swartland, and then Walker Bay. Walker Bay being very much the sort of the coastal region, which you could actually say Walker Bay is like the Burgundy of South Africa, with specific Pinot Noir and Chardonnay grape varieties planted there. There you have a nice overview of the Western Cape, giving the opportunity to please take the time and look at the different grape varieties, at the wine grape growing regions, and of course seeing which grape varieties grow in these regions as well, their proximity to the coastline and also the topography as well and altitude. I think it's always nice to have a few impressions of the wine regions to make it sort of give you that feeling, as we say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So here you have a nice impression of Elgin, More inland, Franschhoek, and then obviously Paarl as well, which is more towards the west. You can actually see a little bit of the way the vineyards are structured here as well as the blue sunshine, which is very, very enticing, and the topography with the mountains as well and tall trees. Stellenbosch, very famous for wine production, also interestingly enough, also for craft beer. So it really is a centre, and due to the proximity of the university in Stellenbosch as well, is very much a metropole for young people, people who enjoy the culture of wine as well, and also a wine growing hub. Swartland, very, very widespread, vivacious vineyards as well, and traditionally, a lot of the lighter, easy drinking style of wines came from the Swartland. Very good value wines as well in the past. And then, juxtaposed to Swartland, you have Walker Bay, which is a hotspot now for the classic sort of Pinot Noir and very, very fresh style of Chardonnays that do bring, along with their pure fruit characters, also that nice sort of mineral character that you could say draws the warmth and the sunshine paradise of the New World with the quality that we would associate with sort of the typicity of European cool climate wines with terroir and also with great varietal expression. Moving now on to the climate, grape growing and also the different soil types in the next slides. Yes, you can see, by the way, in the sailing regatta, how the boats are being propelled along with the strong winds, that the currents and the winds play a key role here. And anyone who has been down to Cape Town, you might have actually seen this concept of two oceans, where two oceans join and meet there, close to Cape Horn, and then obviously the winds there make a huge, huge impression, not only on the offshore winds on the sea, but also they do go inland as well and has a moderating effect on the temperatures in the wine growing regions. There's a nice expression of the topography there, high mountains, and please see bright blue sunshines. And for all of you that are probably thinking in December and January, it's all very, very cool here in Europe, then don't forget that in South Africa, being in the Southern Hemisphere, then it is bright sunshine and it is essentially their summer from the months of December, January and February, which means obviously that the harvest would occur between the end of January until the end of March, beginning of April of any given year. And the temperatures as well. So you've got the temperatures in the cities, and I think if you take the time to look through that, you will actually see the difference in the temperature and how the ocean is very, very central in moderating the temperatures in the vineyards as well. So please take a look through those facts and figures here on this sheet. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the Southern Hemisphere here. So the spring is essentially September, October, November. And incidentally, November is a beautiful time of the year to visit South Africa if you ever get the opportunity. There you have the spring in South Africa, the average temperature, and also more importantly, rainfall levels. And as we're all celebrating Christmas here in Europe, then think about the summer down in South Africa with December, January, February being the warmest part of the year, warmest time of the year down here. And then with the average temperature and rainfall too. Autumn approaches. Autumn is the harvest time. March, April, May is then essentially when most of the harvest is done in South Africa, but a lot of the cooler regions will still have some grapes being picked into April as well, giving that longer growing season as well, an excellent varietal expression of the wines. And again, an overview of the temperatures and rainfall data. Winter, and it does snow in South Africa, certainly on the more higher parts of the peaks on the mountains here. So their winter is June, July and August, which then completes the full circle of the year. The soil plays a very, very important role in any wine growing region, but more specifically also in South Africa. So you have the Table Mountain sandstone. Then you have granite soil structure as well, that we would call a bedrock soil here. And then that sort of shaly kind of light shale and which we would say slate type of soil as well that you have, which do impart mineral characters and flavors into the wines. So the group of different soil forms. This is a nice overview of the different kind of soil structures you would see in the wine growing regions of South Africa. The historical overview of South Africa, it's had quite a history, and we're going to go through that one right now. On a very, very positive note, which I think is nice, it's always beautiful to celebrate some form of jubilee, if you like. And here we have from 1659 right through to 2022, 363 years of South African winemaking heritage. So back in the day, 1652, the Dutch East India Company. You must remember that before the Suez Canal was built, the only way to get to India to buy the spices and goods that were so sought after back in the day, you had to actually then circumnavigate Africa completely. Very, very long and arduous journey. So right in the middle where the winds were at their strongest, this is where the Dutch settlers set and had then their port here. So there was lots of practical regions back in the day to settle in South Africa, more specifically around Cape Town. Going back to the history, you see here, there's a diary extract from the 2nd of February, 1659, about the initial thoughts of wine production. Fast forward to 1990. The name Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years imprisoned on Robben Island, was then freed, and that was the beginning of a time of freedom for the country of South Africa, and that was the beginning also of a more open way of, well, actually the rebirth of the South African wine industry. 1994 is then essentially the start of when really things started moving again. Now, don't get me wrong, there were the cooperatives. There always was wine produced in the 1950s and 60s and even earlier as well. And I've had the opportunity to taste some really special wines that go back to the 70s and 60s from, for example, Nederburg, and they still host an outstandingly highly competent wine auction from these old stuff. But the wine industry in South Africa, as we know it today, started around 30 years ago. Here we have some key facts now, specifically the grape varieties. A lot of these grape varieties will seem very familiar to you. Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Carignan, Cinsault, Gamay, Grenache, Malbec, Merlot, Mourvèdre, Muscatel, and French varieties you might know, Nebbiolo, Petit Verdot. Petit Verdot is also really coming on. Some really nice single varieties Petit Verdots coming out of certainly Walker Bay. Pinot Noir, Pinotage. And when you think about Pinotage, think of South Africa. It's one of those great varieties. It's berries, it smells of bananas, very easy to identify in a blind tasting, ironically. But that is really the heritage of South Africa in an array of different wine qualities, from very inexpensive entry-level wines to quite sought-after special vintage bottlings. Ruby Cabernet, Shiraz, and then we have some Portuguese that we would associate with Portuguese original grape varieties as well, the Tinta Barroca and the Touriga Nacional. The whites as well, no surprise, very much a Francophile style here. I think the ones that really stand out is here Chardonnay and Chenin Blanc, Colombard and Riesling. But then also you've got different sort of more niche varieties like a Gewürztraminer, Grenache Blanc, and then even if we go down Palomino, which we think about with sherry, but makes a very nice light dry white wine as well, especially from Pal, Pinot Gris, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and interestingly enough, dry Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon is quite popular from Stellenbosch as well. So certainly worth looking out for some of those great varieties and wines if you find them. Trebbiano, which we know from Italy, but makes a very nice, easy drinking white wine also in South Africa. And Viognier, which brings up beautiful apricot blossom characters as well. So really, it's a wonderful wine country with an array of different grape varieties, each with very much their own individual expression. Let's hone in on Cabernet Sauvignon as well. And as this is more in more information, you've seen all this before, the different, where the parentage of Cabernet Sauvignon is. So I'll talk more about the taste that you would expect from Cabernet Sauvignon from South Africa. What you'd have is this very rich cassis, grape cassis aroma, very, very fresh black currants. And there might always be that touch of mint. There is the proximity of eucalyptus as well there, so you've got that nice sort of minty character that sometimes comes through on the South African Cabernet Sauvignon. Very rich, very bold. Sometimes it can be a style of Cabernet Sauvignon that's very rich and opulent, that we would probably associate with something almost like from Australia. And then there are other wine producers, particularly in Stellenbosch as well, that make a sort of a more Francophile style, so Bordeaux touch, Bordeaux blend as well. So funnily enough, Cabernet Sauvignon, if you do get the chance to identify it, it has that sort of reminder of a sort of a very, very ripe Bordeaux blend, but there's that sort of richness that gives it its heritage, or if you like, tells you of its origin of being in South Africa. Moving on now to a different wine style which is specific to South Africa, and this is sparkling wine. So Cap Classique, traditional method, so essentially from a production point of view, very similar to a champagne, a cremant, very similar to an Austrian sparkling wine or a sect. And this is the sort of the bottle fermentation, second fermentation in the bottle. Traditionally, Cap Classique is made from Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, so white pressed. You can have it as a Blanc. You can have it as a non-vintage Brut. You can have it as a vintage Brut if you like as well. There's some Pinotage as well that's made in a form of Cap Classique. Very nice, easy drinking style. Mostly on the lees for about 12 months, but a lot of producers are actually extending that as well. Pinot Meunier also, which we know from Champagne, is used in Cap Classique, and you're finding that a lot of the European influence, especially French influence, on the style of wine, of sparkling wine coming out of South Africa. But just remember, we're here essentially in the New World, but you're getting very fresh, dry Cap Classiques, and also very, very strong, rich, bold, red wines from Cabernet Sauvignon or from Pinotage. So you see actually the flexibility or the huge potential of South Africa as a very abundant wine growing country. Chardonnay is very, very important in South Africa. Again, it's a great variety that's known universally around the world. But I think the styles you get from South Africa can be from Walker Bay, very, very, very crisp, very, very dry, beautiful to enjoy lots of unoaked styles from Elgin. And then you go into sort of like barrel fermented or wild yeast fermented styles of Chardonnay coming out of Stellenbosch, and quite rich, bold, barrel-aged Chardonnays coming out from Franschhoek as well. So really there's a lot of different styles of Chardonnay you can try from South Africa, and I certainly do invite you to explore what is available in your respective markets. Again, as we know from Chardonnay, it's one of those great varieties that really does take in its environment as well. So aged in barrel. The time of harvest also plays a very key role for Chardonnay in South Africa as well. So if you are doing some research into different kinds of styles of Chardonnay, or are doing a benchmark tasting, just find out as much as you can about the time of harvest, how is the wine matured in the barrel, or maybe unoaked styles as well, and that will give you a little bit of an idea about the different styles that you would expect from the different specific regions in South Africa where Chardonnay is planted. Yes, and then it is Chenin Blanc. So essentially, if I remember back to my wine trading days, it would be around the first week of July in any given year. So 1st of July, then we would have the very, very first delivery of Chenin Blanc coming in from South Africa. So that would have been from the vintage. So it's, for a lot of consumers, it's quite confusing. So you would have, for example, in July, in Europe, the very first bottling of a Chenin Blanc from South Africa on the shelf, whilst the grapes for example, the Austrian or the German harvest, they're still green little bowls. They're not even beginning their sort of veraison or their maturation process. So it was always that very funny time back in the trade where you had to explain to the customer, yes, I know that a lot of the grapes that are in Europe are still actually on the vine. They won't be picked for another 3 or 4 months. But South Africa already has fixed, already bottled wines that are then on the shelves. And I think Chenin Blanc is certainly the signature grape variety that we would associate with South Africa in a dry style. So what I do invite you to do, which is quite nice, is you have a Chenin Blanc from South Africa and then do a blind tasting and try that with a Chenin Blanc from France and then a Chenin Blanc from another region around the world. It can be from Australia, for example, or somewhere else. Do a blind tasting, then try to identify the different characters that you get out of them as well. And you will find that Chenin Blanc from South Africa is certainly very, very specific and recognizable for yourselves. As I say, Chenin Blanc and for the red wine, the Pinotage are certainly the grape varieties that you would most readily associate with South African wine growing regions. Yes, well, Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is everywhere, isn't it? Goodness me. And we all know that there are well over 200, 250 different types of mutations of Pinot Noir. So it's been around, it goes around. We all know that Pinot Noir is a very, very difficult grape variety to grow well. But it does do very well in South Africa as well. So what is Pinot Noir in South Africa used for? It's used for certainly as a pairing buddy in Cape Classique. But more recently, I'm seeing some beautiful, beautiful Pinot Noirs coming out of there as well, in sometimes different kinds of styles. So you'll see very much the French Burgundian style, which is very sort of mineral rich, a little bit more the fruit driven, and the oak aging is more sort of delicately balanced. And then, there's one producer I can think of who's made outstanding Pinot Noir over the last 30, 35 years, and that's Hamilton Russell. Certainly a wine worth looking into. And if you can get some library vintages, you can see how this wine, the wines really do develop beautifully in the bottle as well. But Pinot Noir does well. Firstly, there's enough nice sunshine. The rainfall is certainly minimal as well, which does help this grape variety. But the time of harvest is essential to make sure that the Pinot does retain its very, very signature fresh red berry characters coming through. And there we are. From Pinot Noir comes also to Pinotage, which, as I said earlier, is a crossing of Pinot Noir and Cinsault. Cinsault, very much a robust, tannin-rich French grape variety, more or less non-exist in France anymore. There's still pockets of it around, but it's a beautiful parent, sort of a grape variety that works very well as a crossing in South Africa. If you were to look at Cinsault in other wine regions of the world, I know that in Lebanon, Chateau Moussard has a little bit of Cinsault in his blend as well, Cabernet Sauvignon with Cinsault. So you've got a sort of very rich tannin, sort of a meaty character of the wine coming through. Might be worth doing a blind tasting with that. But I think the nicest thing you can do with Pinotage is to do a wine tasting of 4 different Pinotages, one which is probably the cheapest you can find in the supermarket, and then something which is probably about 8 or 10 years old, and then taste them together, and then you will find the characters of the sort of chocolate note coming through, a little bit of that banana character, cooked banana, baked banana character on the rich fruit, berry fruit characters, and then it will give you a nice idea. Pinotage does well without oak, and it loves oak as well. So very versatile grape variety, hence it being so important in South Africa. We all know Sauvignon Blanc internationally. So if you think about countries around the world where Sauvignon Blanc is certainly very well known, you think of South Africa, you would think of New Zealand. If you live in Austria, you think certainly of Styria or Steiermark as a wine growing region as well. Parts of France, Bordeaux specifically, and more recently, probably parts of the cooler parts of California and also South America, Chile, Casablanca Valley, for example, later. So that's where Sauvignon Blanc is everywhere. And in France, obviously, in the Loire as being the place where we all think about it. But interesting enough, the Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa was, especially from Franschhoek or from Stellenbosch, for years it was very, very oaky, very rich, very bold type of style. So you would have a Sauvignon Blanc with about 14.5% alcohol. And essentially, the best way to drink it is how the Sauvignon Blanc is drunk down in, for example, a nice bar in Stellenbosch. You would order a large glass. So you'd have a red wine glass. You'd pour in your Sauvignon Blanc with 13.5, 14% alcohol, and you would add 2 or 3 ice cubes just to cool it down and to give that sort of drinkability as well. Nowadays, you're finding Sauvignon Blancs coming out of South Africa from 12.5 to maximum 13%, and then you've still got the rich full-bodied styles as well. So there's a lot more versatility coming through, and you see different styles available in the markets. But essentially, very nice, easy drinking, very, very fruit-forward style of Sauvignon Blanc, and the rich and bold styles as well. So similar sort of situation with the Pinotage. Get yourself 4 or 5 different Sauvignon Blancs from the different regions. I would recommend you get Sauvignon Blanc from Walker Bay, from Elgin, from Franschhoek, and from Stellenbosch, and maybe one from the Western Cape, around towards Paarl. Do a tasting together. Go for the youngest wine you can find, the youngest possible vintage. And then I would probably say choose a Sauvignon Blanc that's about 5 or 6 years of age on the bottle, and then do a tasting. You'll see a difference in the color, different in the aromas as well, because obviously Sauvignon Blanc's got a huge aroma spectrum, and then you will find that sort of nice sort of on the oak barreled styles, that sort of nice coconut sort of pepperiness that comes through, which is beautiful, and on the much fresher styles, this amazing drinkability. And it's no reason at all that the number one export market for Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa is the UK. The UK loves Sauvignon Blanc, so Great Britain in that case. And you will actually find that it's the volumes are huge that they sell into it because it's such an easy wine to drink. And it's also very good if you own a restaurant or a bar, because you can open the bottle with a screw cap and it keeps for about 4 or 5 days. So there's very little spoilage as well. Very, very remarkable, easy drinking style of wine. But again, a broad of different styles you have. Yeah, we all know Shiraz. Welcome to Shiraz country. Yeah, and Shiraz is pretty tasty. I mean, back in the day, you'd have a lot of Shiraz blended in with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot as well. And there's a lot of single variety Shiraz comes out as well, especially then from Stellenbosch as well. Some really tasty stuff there. Now, if you think about South Africa more specifically, let's say Franschhoek and Stellenbosch, there's a lot of really, really good restaurants down there as well. And the restaurants, so this whole idea of food pairing and wine dinners is very much an important issue, an important thing in South Africa. So when you think about South African wines, always think about the food pairing element as well. They go really, really well with an array of different dishes you can try. And thinking about Shiraz from South Africa, then you do have that very rich, bold style, a lot of black pepper coming through as well, very, very deep color. And if it's aged in oak as well, which most of them are, you've got a lot of weight, spiciness as well. And it's a beautiful barbecue wine as well. And you will find a lot of the South African wines as well, they do have funky names. So they'll be like, for example, Goats du Rhône, which is like a play on words for Côte de Rhône. Or there's the Chocolate Block as well, or there's East Block. You know, they got quite creative names as well, which sort of more tells the story of the wine, but then you find out what the great varieties as well, which is sort of secondary. So interesting stuff there. So, and that is a nice introduction now to the different wine styles that we find in South Africa as well. So here we have the different wine styles as well. So we've heard about the Blanc de Blanc and the Blanc de Noir as well, which you're finding here. Cap Classique is certainly can be vintage or non-vintage as well. And you'll find a lot of producers down there, especially Graham Beck. He's got some really, really, really tasty Cap Classiques. You'll find a Blanc de Blanc or a non-vintage, and they'll have a rosé as well. And then they'll have a better one that's aged on the lees for longer, probably sold in a gift box as well. And from a price point of view, a classic Cap Classique would always be around sort of between 12 and 14 euros on this market. So internationally, you'd be looking at about sort of $15, $17. But if you get some really good stuff, some that's been aged or a specific site, then you'd be looking at a lot more money as well, and probably into sort of entry-level champagne territory as far as a price point is concerned. The styles of South African sparkling wines, they're exactly the same as you would have here in Europe as well. So just take your time to remind yourself of the different, the dosage, the sugar levels that you would have from Brut to extra Brut right through to a sweeter style. It is interesting to note that the demi-sec nectar style, which has probably been popular from Champagne since about 2004, 2005, certainly in more European markets, so the last sort of 15, 18 years. This style of wine is coming out of South Africa as well. So you see that South African sparkling wine, they're very open-minded as well, and are also looking at international styles which are selling well, which they can obviously then market as well. And so you're essentially trying a really nice sparkling wine from South Africa that's generally at the moment is certainly offering very, very good value for money. Looking into the production side of things, what we have, and there you have as top 20 South African Cap Classique export markets as well. Cap Classique is very much a niche from South Africa, but we're seeing it in most markets as well. And certainly here in Austria, most of the leading retailers do have some form of South African portfolio with Cap Classique as well as part of that, alongside their still red and still white wines, and even part of sweeties as well coming through. There you have a nice graph which sort of shows you the development over the last period as well, which is always nice for background reference information. And then a little bit of information about the vinification of Cap Classique, which is essentially, they've taken a lot out of the Cremant and the Champagne and the European sparkling wine manufacturing or production methods as well, if you like. So you have the use of stainless steel and wooden barrels as you would over here. But since June 2021, the legal minimum time is actually 12 months on the lease, but most producers did that anyway. But they set that as 12 months, so that's a nice, nice there. It's in between Austria at 9 months and Champagne is between 12 and 15 months, depending on how they are. But a lot of the top producers do actually have them on the lease for longer. And you will find a lot of the Cap Classique you can buy in European markets are generally of a better quality. And there you have then some levels. So KWV was certainly the biggest name that we all knew. A cooperative established in 1918 as well. That was a big producer, part of an international consortium group nowadays. But essentially you see the history and the heritage of South Africa that dates back to 1659, which is quite remarkable. And as time goes, don't forget the international, if you look at it now, the idea of the South African wine industry is still very much in its youth. It's had this revival as well, but we're just coming into its 30th year now. So if you look in that, since what's happened in 1994, things are moving forward, and there's going to be sort of more of these international certification as well of fair labour practice. And just note also that a lot of fair trade wines are coming out of South Africa as well. As you can see on this slide as well, that fair trade, working closely with the growers and also the growers' employees and the pickers, is of paramount importance for the ethic value of wine that we all love to enjoy. So this is La Motte. I remember selling La Motte back in Europe years and years ago. If you do get the chance to go down to South Africa, and more specifically to Franschhoek, La Motte is a beautiful wine estate. Beautiful wine estate. They have a wonderful restaurant as well, and the opportunity to go running through the vineyards. They have some absolutely outstanding accommodation opportunities as well. But now, looking at the label, as you say, the label does tell a story. So here we have La Motte, which is the brand name or the winery name. The vintage is always on the front of the label here as well, and then the grape variety. So Shiraz Viognier, as we know from Rhone Valley, is very much then the classic blend that works quite well. And the proportions of Shiraz and Viognier are generally very similar to what you expect in European wine growing regions as well. And more specifically is a wine of origin. So, look at the label when you get it. All the information will be on there for you. And if not, you'll find that a lot of the South African producers do have quite remarkably informative websites as well, so you can find any additional information that you would require. And this is it, you see. So, nice picture of Austria there as well. So bringing you back here. And because we've just finished our South African online wine course, I think the best thing now to do is to organize a tasting amongst yourselves. Sharing is caring, enjoy the wines together, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? Learning by doing. Thank you very much for your attention and have a good day. Thank you.